Today's notes are graphing slope-intercept form day 1. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So take a second to pause the video and copy down these 3 steps on the top left, and then even the graph on the right side. They'll come in handy as we work through these examples. So assuming that the equation that you're given is in slope-intercept form, you can follow 3 steps in order to graph it. So step 1, plot b on the x-axis. Step 2, use the slope to plot another point from the y-intercept, which is the b value. And step 3, draw a line connecting those 2 points. So notice on the graph, the line given, it says y equals mx plus b. So this is for any generic linear line. And you'll notice that the y-intercept is the point 0b. So whatever b is, that's the point where the line crosses the y-axis. And then m is going to be our slope. That's how we're going to find our next point. So one kind of like trick to help you remember is that b is where we begin. So that's our first point. And then m is where we move. So that tells us how to get to our next point. So for example 1, graph y equals 2x plus 1. So I purposely didn't use graph paper so that anybody who didn't have graph paper could kind of follow along with how we would set up our graph. If you do have graph paper, even better. So for example 1, graph y equals 2x plus 1. The first thing that I want to do is I want to identify what my slope and what my y-intercept are. So if we're comparing y equals 2x plus 1 to y equals mx plus b, we just need to see what number is being multiplied by x, that's my m, what number is being added after, that's my b. So in this case, since a 2 is being multiplied by x, my slope is 2. And then since 1 is being added after, my b is 1. And then we can start to set up our graph. And if you're just on regular or line paper, or really even if you're on graph paper, it's really important to use some sort of straight edge. So like you can use a ruler, you can use like your ID card, whatever straight edge object that you have, that's what you should use, but you should definitely always use a straight edge. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set up the x and y axis. So I'm going to draw a vertical line, and that'll be my y-axis. And then through the middle of that, I'm going to draw a horizontal line, and that's going to be my x-axis. And then I'm going to switch over to the clear ruler just so you guys can kind of like see through the ruler as we continue here. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to scale our axis. So it's up to you on how big that you want your graph to be or the scale of your graph to be, but you want to at least have enough for the points that you're creating. So you want to kind of keep that in mind, like we're going to start at 1 because that's our y-intercept and our slope is 2. So that's going to be a pretty condensed graph. We don't have to worry about having a super big graph or going really far down the x-axis or anything like that. So try it all as even as you can as far as spaces, some tick marks down the x-axis in both directions. And then try to keep the same size spacing to draw the tick marks up and down the y-axis. And they don't have to be perfect. They can be if you want to use a ruler or some other way to measure them, but as accurate as you possibly can. And then when we go to graph it, when we're ready to graph it, the last thing we want to do is just make sure we write our scale. So you don't have to write 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way down, but as long as you mark at least 1 in each direction, so 1 on the x-axis and 1 on the y-axis, we're able to tell what each mark means. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be 1 unit. Each unit could go 2 units, or it could be 2 spaces and we can go 2, 4, 6. So you just need to label that. So once we're ready, our slope is 2 and our y-intercept is 1. So we talked about B being where you begin. So since B is 1, I'm going to begin at 1 on the y-axis. So I make a point at 1 on the y-axis. And then my slope, M, is 2. Slope is rise over run. So sometimes it's helpful for us to see slope as a fraction, even if it's not given to us as a fraction. So I'm going to write any whole number that you have, you can write it over 1. So since my slope is 2 over 1, 2 is my rise, 1 is my run. they're both positive, so that means I'm going to go up 2, and then I'm going to go right 1. If one of them was negative, I'd either have to go down or left, depending. So from my beginning point, from 0, 1, I'm going to count up 2, so up 1, 2, and then right 1 unit. I do want to encourage you guys to get graph paper if you don't already have it. It just makes everything more clean and neat and easy to follow. But if you don't right now, it's not a big deal. Just work on getting it. So you really only need 2 points since all the points should fall in a straight line. But the more points that you go, the more accurate a line will be. So I kind of ran out of room to go another point up here. So if I want, I can go in the opposite direction. So I went up 2, right 1. So if I want to go find a point that falls down here, I can flip both of those directions. I can go down 1, 2, left 1, and that should fall in the same line. And then once we're ready, we can go ahead and we can connect our points. And draw our line. And then this is our final line, so we can move on to the next problem. So example 2, graph y equals negative 1/3 x plus 4. So first thing we need to do is figure out our m and our b. So my m is always the number multiplied by x. This is a negative 1/3, so that negative needs to be included. So m is, and I'm going to move this negative with the 1. So I'm going to put that negative in the numerator with the 1 to help us keep our rise over run straight so we don't accidentally have the wrong slope. And then our b is the number added after, so b is 4. Remember, we also call this number a constant, a number that's not being multiplied by a variable. And then from there, we can use our straight edge, our ruler, our ID card, whatever it is, to create vertical and horizontal lines to create our x and y axis. And you should be using a straight edge even if you have graph paper, because it's like kind of difficult to draw straight lines even if you have graph paper. And then I can label my x and y axis. Before I start making the tick marks, one thing to notice here is my y-intercept is 4. So if I scale and create the same size tick marks as I did up here, I'm probably not gonna have enough room because my top point up here is already 4. So I need to make them a little bit smaller so that I can start at a y-intercept of 4 and still have a nice looking graph. So make them a little bit smaller, make them as close to the same size as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure that if you notice like a big gap that you go back and adjust it. And then lastly, if each tick mark is gonna be worth 1 unit, make sure you label that. And then now we're ready to start graphing. So my slope is negative 1/3, my b is 4, so remember b is where we begin. So we're gonna go to 4 on the y-axis. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and plot a point there. And then I'm gonna use my m to move and to find my next point. So if my slope is negative 1/3, this is why we put the negative just with the numerator. So if it's negative 1 in the numerator, and my numerator is my rise, I have to go down 1. And then my run is positive 3, so I'm gonna go right 3. We can flip-flop it, we can go up 1 and left 3, but only one of them can be in the negative direction. So I'm gonna start at my point 0, 4, and then I'm gonna go down 1, right 3. 1, 2, 3, and make a point right there. And then I even have room to go to another point, so I can count down 1 again, and then 1, 2, 3. And then I can connect my points. And when you draw your line, you always want to finish both sides with an arrow, because the line is just not this segment. It technically goes on forever. It's just our graph doesn't go on forever, but the line will. And then one other thing that you can use to kind of like check your work is we know that positive slopes go up and to the right and negative slopes go down and to the right. So up here I had a positive slope of 2 and my graph went up and to the right. And then down here I had a negative slope of 1/3 and my graph went down and to the right. So far so good with those. And then our last example, graph y equals 4/3 x minus 2. So the first thing we'll do is identify our slope and our y-intercept. So our m is the number multiplied by x. So m equals 4/3. And then our b is -2. So that's going to be our starting point. Notice that because it was a -2, it has to be -2. And then we can draw our x and y axis. And then I just need to make sure that I scale it appropriately so that I can fit my points on. So my y-intercept is -2. So I don't necessarily need too many points since I'm not starting super high or super low. So I'll scale it somewhere in between the first two. And if you ever notice like you didn't quite scale it correctly, you can always extend your x and y axis and just make them a little bit bigger so that you're able to add more line segments or more little tick marks to make their axes longer. So m is 4/3, b is -2, so b is where I begin. So I'm going to go on the y-axis to -2, so down 1, 2, and then make a point right there. And then if my slope is positive 4/3, my rise is 4, so I'm going to go up 4. My run is 3, so I'm going to go right 3. Notice most of the time we end up going right for our run because you can easily control whether it's positive or negative just by going up or down. And then if I'm starting at -2 and I'm going up 4, right 3, I can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then right 1, 2, 3. So I end up at the point 3, 2. And then I'm just going to go ahead and connect those 2 points. So when you draw your line, make sure it extends through both points, and then I finish it off with a couple arrows because that line is going to continue on forever. If you're having a hard time drawing like the x and y axis at all, or you don't have graph paper, or you're not sure, or you're not super comfortable with it, there's also, they make these like graph sticky notes that you can buy. You can get them off Amazon. So, or I'm sure you can get them maybe like the Staples website or something like that, but these are out there, they exist. So if you Google it, you could probably find some if this is something that you would like. I've also seen stamps, so maybe you don't want to put sticky notes on your paper because it would get all bulky or in your notebook. I've seen a stamp that when you stamp it on your page, it creates a graph for you. I also saw it on Amazon, so if you want to find that out or if you want to ask me about it in class, I can help you find it at least.